Everything you say here is completely confidential. Andrew Keller, a man who commanded boardrooms and practically bent markets to his will, finally let out a long breath. He sank into the plush leather of the therapist's couch, and for the first time in months, he felt something like relief. Across from him, the serene-looking Dr. Laura Bennett offered a gentle smile. On the table between them, the tiny red light of a recorder blinked steadily, a silent promise of privacy. But this office wasn't a sanctuary. It was a stage, and this wasn't therapy. It was an interrogation. Because in a darkened room, behind a one-way mirror, Natalie Keller was watching her husband confess. She saw the fake relief on his face, a face she once loved, now just a mask she was about to shatter. Her own expression was ice-cold, carved from pure betrayal. "It's eating me alive, doctor." Andrew's voice crackled through her earpiece. The affair. A bitter smile crept onto Natalie's lips. She whispered to the empty room, "Not for long." That little red light wasn't just recording his lies. It was a countdown timer, ticking away the seconds until his entire world came crashing down. And she was the one holding the stopwatch. It all started with something small. So small, in fact, that mentioning it felt paranoid. For Natalie, it was her grandmother's necklace, a delicate gold locket he'd given her on their wedding day. A few weeks ago, it had simply vanished from her jewelry box. Natalie tore the house apart, her anxiety growing with every empty drawer. When she finally asked Andrew about it, he just laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was dripping with condescension. "Honestly, Nat, you'd lose your head if it wasn't attached. It'll turn up." He patted her on the head like a forgetful child and told her she was being paranoid. He gaslit her so expertly that she almost believed him. Almost. But then, 2 weeks later, she was scrolling through social media when her world just stopped. There it was, in a photo posted by one of Andrew's young, ambitious protégés at a company gala. A smiling woman stood under the ballroom lights, and around her neck was her grandmother's locket. The sight didn't just break Natalie's heart. It forged it into something else, something sharp and cold. Andrew hadn't just cheated. He'd stolen a piece of her family's history, a symbol of their life together, and gifted it to his mistress. When she confronted him with the photo, his face went blank. He insisted it was a coincidence, just a cheap knockoff. He called her crazy and obsessed. The gaslighting got worse, like a suffocating fog meant to make her question her own sanity. But the photograph was proof. It was the first crack in their perfect life, and Natalie knew right then she had to bring the whole wall down. Natalie knew a man like Andrew couldn't be taken down by a single photo. He was a master of denial, an artist of the intricate lie. His power was a fortress, and attacking him head-on would be useless. He'd crush her in court, paint her as hysterical, and walk away with everything. No. To beat a manipulator, you have to become a master of the game yourself. Her plan started with a phone call she never thought she'd make, to her estranged identical twin sister, Laura. They had the same eyes and the same voice, but their lives couldn't be more different. Natalie was a corporate wife. Laura was an academic, a respected psychologist. Natalie laid out everything: the affair, the gaslighting, the stolen locket. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was proposing a partnership, a psychological trap. At first, Laura was horrified. The ethical lines were a canyon. But as Natalie described the years of quiet emotional abuse and control, Laura started to see it differently. This wasn't just a vengeful wife. This was a victim fighting back. The setup was flawless. They rented a small office in a part of town Andrew never went to. Laura's real degrees hung on the wall, but the name on the door said Dr. Bennett. They created a professional website, posted a few articles, and even wrote some glowing fake testimonials. The final piece of the puzzle was planting the idea. In a moment of pretend marital concern, Natalie suggested Andrew see someone for his obvious stress. She casually mentioned a highly recommended therapist she'd heard about, someone totally discreet, Dr. Bennett. Arrogant as ever, Andrew took the bait. He actually thought it was his idea, proof of how proactive he was. He had no idea he was walking right into a web she had so carefully spun. The first session was a masterclass in deception. Andrew, used to being the most powerful person in any room, settled onto the couch and started performing. He talked about market pressures and the burdens of leadership, painting himself as a victim of his own success. And Dr. Bennett, or rather, Laura, playing the part of a lifetime, just listened with practiced empathy. In the other room, Natalie listened to every word, her heart like a stone in her chest. By the second session, the dam started to crack. Andrew, completely disarmed by Laura's calming presence, started talking about Natalie. He painted her as needy, unstable, and paranoid, laying the groundwork for the exact story he'd use against her in the divorce. Then, in the third session, it happened. The moment both sisters had been waiting for. Andrew leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The stress is not just work. There's someone else. He confessed to the affair, not with shame, but with a weird, boastful pride. He described the thrill of lying about it, the excitement of nearly getting caught. And then, with a little smile, he added the most chillingly ironic comment. You know, it's funny, Doctor. You kind of remind me of Nat. You have the same eyes. Through the earpiece, Natalie heard Laura's voice stay perfectly calm, guiding him deeper and deeper into his own confession. But in the observation room, Natalie squeezed her eyes shut. The pain was sharp, but beneath it, her resolve hardened into steel. Every word he spoke was just another nail in his coffin. He thought he was unburdening his soul, but he was actually handing her the very weapon she'd used to destroy him. As the weeks passed, Andrew got more comfortable and even more arrogant in his confessions. The affair, it turned out, was just a beginning, with Laura, as Dr. Bennett, expertly guiding him toward the topic of finances. He started to open up about his real secrets. She mentioned the link between professional pressure and personal secrets, and how hidden burdens can cause stress. It worked better than they ever imagined, believing he was in a totally secure vault. Andrew started boasting about his financial schemes. And that's when the confession came that changed everything. It wasn't just about hiding a few assets for a divorce. It was so much darker. She thinks the company can't survive without me, Andrew sneered. What she doesn't know is that I've already got my exit strategy. He then laid out a plan of stunning cruelty. For the past year, he had been setting up offshore accounts in shell corporations, not just to hide their money, but to frame Natalie for embezzlement. He had forged her signature, made transfers from accounts in her name, and created a paper trail so convincing that she'd never be able to deny it. His plan was to trigger an audit right after he left her, ensuring she'd be buried in legal fees and facing criminal charges. If she leaves me, he finished with a satisfied sigh, she'll have nothing. In the other room, Natalie's breath caught in her throat. This was way beyond cheating. This was a plot to completely annihilate her. She looked down and saw her hand was trembling, not with fear, but with pure, white-hot rage. This trap wasn't about getting a fair divorce settlement anymore. It was about survival. The divorce proceedings started exactly how Andrew wanted them to. His lawyers portrayed Natalie as an unstable woman making wild accusations. Andrew sat right there beside them, looking for all the world like a poor, long-suffering husband. They offered her a joke of a settlement, claiming the company was struggling because of Natalie's own financial irresponsibility. It was a performance of his life. Then it was Natalie's turn. Her lawyer stood up. Your Honor, we have evidence that speaks directly to Mr. Keller's character and his fraudulent activities. Andrew's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed it. A speaker system was brought into the courtroom. The first audio file played was Andrew's voice, clear as day, describing his affair in detail to Dr. Bennett. A murmur rippled through the room. Andrew's face went white. Then came the next recording. It was his voice again, this time bragging about the entire embezzlement scheme, explaining step by step how he framed his own wife. You could have heard a pin drop. Andrew's lawyer was stunned into silence. Andrew shot to his feet, his face turning purple with rage. It's a setup. This is illegal. She recorded me. He pointed a shaking finger at Natalie. She knew. She set me up. Natalie's lawyer calmly waited for him to finish. Your Honor, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Mr. Keller is correct. My client did plan to record his confessions. However, his claim of being set up is interesting, as it suggests a certain pattern of his own. She then pulled out a second batch of evidence. These are files we recovered from Mr. Keller's personal laptop. They are his own secret recordings of my client, dating back over a year. Audio files, keystroke loggers, GPS tracking. It seems Mr. Keller has a thing for recording people without their consent, mostly for stalking and control. It was the ultimate checkmate. Andrew's own paranoia, his obsessive need to control everything, was what finally brought him down. The judge's face was grim. While Natalie's recordings were in a legal gray area, the proof of his financial fraud and his own illegal surveillance was undeniable. The fallout was swift and spectacular. Andrew's empire, built on a foundation of lies, completely crumbled. The recording of his plot to frame Natalie didn't just lose in the divorce case. It kicked off a full-blown federal investigation into his company. The evidence of fraud was airtight. The court didn't just grant Natalie the divorce. It awarded her 70% of their total assets, including every penny in the offshore accounts the investigation quickly uncovered. The judge cited Andrew's gross economic misconduct and malicious intent for the lopsided split. His own words hadn't just cost him his fortune, they convicted him. Socially, he was finished. The story became a media sensation, a modern tale of a man brought down by his own hubris. He was an outcast in the business world, and a punchline in the circles he once ran. And his mistress, the one with the stolen locket, she disappeared the second the scandal broke, leaving him completely alone. The final image wasn't of Andrew's defeat, but of Natalie's quiet victory. Months later, she stood on the balcony of her new apartment, looking out over the city that was once his kingdom. In her hand, she held her grandmother's locket, which she had tracked down and bought back from a pawn shop. She wasn't just free, she was powerful. She had been pushed to the edge, gaslit, and almost destroyed. But in the end, she had outplayed the master manipulator at his own twisted game. He thought he was confessing to a stranger in a safe space. He never realized Natalie had simply built the perfect trap, just for him. Andrew wanted a confidential place to unload his guilt, and Natalie gave him one, turning every secret word into another brick in his prison cell. What would you have done in her shoes? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love stories about psychological revenge and ultimate justice, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming up next.